Be out by Monday. Diane, my mother-in-law, declared from her kitchen throne, flicking her hand at my pregnant wife like she was dismissing a servant. We're selling this place to pay for our retirement cruise. You've taken advantage long enough. Melissa's eyes filled instantly, tears spilling as she yanked clothes from the closet. I didn't move, just pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd been saving for half a decade. The title company, the one that knew exactly whose names were on the deed. The morning had begun like any other in the Riverside house we'd shared with her parents for 7 years. I was scrambling eggs when Diane and her husband, Frank, strode in dress like they were headed to an open house. The smell of coffee mingled with Diane's heavy perfume as she dropped the ultimatum that would explode right back in her face. "We've made a decision," Frank said, his gaze sliding away in that gutless way of his. "The house hits the market Monday. Realtors already booked." Melissa, 6 months pregnant, clutched the counter. "What? Mom, we agreed we'd stay until after the baby." "Plans changed," Diane cut her off. "We found a retirement community in Arizona. Pool, golf, people our age. We're done playing landlord to grown children who should already have their own place." The irony was thick enough to choke on. Landlords, the word dangled in the air, absurd and cruel. "We pay rent," Melissa whispered, her voice cracking. "We help with everything." "Helping isn't the same as owning," Frank finally muttered, forcing himself to meet my eyes. "A man provides his own roof, Kevin. Maybe this will give you the push you need." I set my mug down with care, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "So you've already decided without a single conversation?" "Our house, our rules," Diane snapped. "By Monday morning you're out. We've been more than generous, but it's time you learned to stand on your own." Melissa was unraveling, panic all over her face. "Kevin, we need to pack the baby's room. What do we do? Where do we go?" I raised a calming hand and pulled out my phone. 1 minute. Diane's eyes narrowed. "Who are you calling?" "This isn't up for debate." "Just handling logistics," I said evenly, scrolling to the number I'd saved years ago. First National Title Company. "Logistics?" Frank barked out a laugh. "The only logistics you need are boxes and a truck." The call connected on the second ring. "First National Title, this is Patricia." "Patricia, this is Kevin Chun. We spoke 5 years ago regarding 4827 Riverside Drive. You assisted with some paperwork." Her voice brightened with recognition. "Of course, Mr. Chun. I remember the quiet title action. How can I help today?" I looked directly at Diane as I spoke. "Could you confirm the current ownership status of that property? There seems to be some misunderstanding." Melissa froze, her tears forgotten. Her parents traded uneasy glances. "1 moment," Patricia said. I could hear keys clicking. "Here it is. 4827 Riverside Drive. Deed lists Kevin and Melissa Chun as the sole owners. Free and clear. No liens. Transfer recorded 5 years ago." I leaned forward, pressing the speaker button. "Would you mind repeating that?" I pressed the button and Patricia's calm, professional voice drifted through the kitchen. "The property at 4827 Riverside Drive is fully owned by Kevin and Melissa Chin. Has been for 5 years. Would you like me to email the deed?" The silence that followed was delicious. "That would be perfect," I replied. "Thank you, Patricia." I ended the call and turned toward my in-laws. Diane's mouth opened and shut like a gasping fish, while Frank's face drained of all color. "That's impossible," Diane whispered. "This is our house. We've lived here 30 years. "You have," I agreed. "As our tenants for the last 5. Melissa clutched my arm, her voice shaking. "Kevin, what?" "I don't understand." I had waited half a decade for this moment. Finally, the truth could come out. "Remember 5 years ago, when your parents were about to lose the house?" I asked softly, when Frank's business collapsed and they were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Melissa nodded slowly, her parents staring silently at the table. "They came to me," I continued. "The bank had already begun foreclosure proceedings. They needed $40,000 just to catch up, plus penalties. They had nothing left to borrow against." "You never told me," Melissa said, her voice small. "They asked me not to. Said it would only upset you." I turned to Diane. "Isn't that true?" Her perfectly styled hair seemed to droop. That was a private matter. Very private, I agreed. So private that when I offered to help, you insisted on certain conditions. You didn't want Melissa to know you'd failed. You didn't want her to see you as anything less than the perfect parents who always had the right to judge everyone else's choices. Frank finally spoke. You said you'd help family. And I did. I cleared the mortgage, $230,000, plus the arrears, plus penalties. Nearly $300,000 total. Melissa gasped. Kevin, how could you even have that kind of money? The software company I started in college, the one your parents dismissed as playing with computers. It was acquired during senior year. I never told you the amount because I glanced at her parents. Well, some people get strange about money. But the house, Frank stammered. You can't just take someone's house. I didn't take it. You handed it over. Legally. At your insistence. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through saved files. I still have the emails. You demanding I take the deed as collateral. You saying you'd rather lose it to family than the bank. You promising to buy it back within 2 years when your big break came. That was the understanding, Diane said weakly. It was supposed to be temporary. 5 years is pretty temporary, I shot back. How many of those ships ever came in, Frank? Silence. Here's what actually happened, I went on. You transferred the deed to us to keep foreclosure off your credit. I paid the mortgage. You were supposed to pay us back, but instead, you've lived here rent-free for 5 years while I covered taxes, insurance, and repairs. The rent you thought you were paying. I shook my head. That was placed in escrow. For the new roof this place desperately needed. Melissa sank into a chair. The roof replacement last year, I reminded her. Our roof. Our responsibility. Though your parents made sure to take credit for it with the neighbors. This is theft, Diane spat, venom creeping back into her tone. Elder abuse. Exploitation. Stop. My voice was sharp, final. I have 5 years' worth of emails begging me not to tell Melissa. 5 years of empty promises to repay. 5 years of you calling me a failure at every family dinner, while living in the very house I saved. That, I said coldly, is exploitation. I scrolled through more emails on my phone. Should I read the one where you wrote that I wasn't man enough to provide for Melissa? Funny thing, that came from the master bedroom of the house I own. Or maybe the one where you said I'd never be anything, while I was busy covering your property taxes. We didn't know, Frank muttered. No, I said. You never asked. You just assumed. Because I drove a Honda instead of a BMW, I had to be broke. Because I didn't flaunt money, I must not have any. Because I worked from home, I must not have a job. I looked each of them in the eye. You built a version of me that matched your story. The failure who trapped your daughter. Easier than admitting you relied on that so-called failure. Melissa was reading the emails on my phone, tears sliding down her face. Mom, you called yourself compassionate, all while living under his roof. We thought it was temporary, Diane insisted. What was temporary, I said, was my patience. But I held back. Partly because I loved Melissa and didn't want to hurt her. And partly because I wanted to see if you'd ever show gratitude, or even basic respect. So what happens now? Frank asked quietly. You throw us out? Your pregnant wife's parents. I laughed. Throw you out? Why would I do that? You're moving to Arizona, remember? That gorgeous retirement community. Swimming pools, golf, neighbors your own age. They exchanged a nervous glance. There's no retirement community, Melissa said slowly. Is there? Diane's silence was all the confirmation we needed. They planned to sell the house they thought was theirs, I explained. Use the money to keep up their lifestyle, then blame the market when they couldn't buy it back. We have nowhere to go, Frank admitted. That's not true, I said. You've got the same choices you offered us an hour ago. Find your own place by Monday. Plenty of apartments around. Of course, you'll need first and last month's rent, a credit check, proof of income. Kevin, Melissa whispered, her hands cradling her stomach, our child inside. They're still my parents. I nodded, which is why I'll make the same offer I made 5 years ago. Stay here as tenants. Real rent, $2,500 a month. Month-to-month lease. Standard rights and obligations. $2,500? Diane shrieked. That's robbery. That's below market for a 4-bedroom in this neighborhood, I replied. Ask your realtor. Oh wait, you might want to cancel that call. This is humiliating, Frank said. No, I corrected him. Humiliating is being told to leave your own home when your wife is 6 months pregnant. This is consequence. I helped Melissa to her feet. We'll get the lease drawn up. First month's rent due right away. Security deposit waived because family. But let me be clear. If there are late payments, more disrespect, or one more lie to our child about who owns this house, you'll get the same 30-day notice any tenant would. No exceptions. There's a difference. I could have had this talk half a decade ago. Instead, I chose to spare your pride, hoping you'd eventually show some decency. That was my mistake. We headed toward the stairs to our room. The master suite Diane had always begrudged us. Wait, Frank called out. What if we can't pay the rent? I stopped and looked back. Then you'll face exactly what you wished on us. Finding a place of your own, standing on your own 2 feet, being the adults you claimed we weren't. Kevin, Melissa murmured as we climbed the stairs. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have let me do it if you knew they'd treat you worse for it? She shook her head, eyes glistening. I'm so sorry. They've been cruel to you all these years. They've just been themselves, I answered. I only gave them enough rope. Back in our room, Melissa sank onto the bed, trying to absorb everything. $2,500 a month, she whispered. Can they even manage that? Frank's pension and Social Security cover it, I said. Barely. They'll have to budget, maybe even cook instead of eating out 5 nights a week. That cruise? A lie. Just like their supposed respect for me. I sat down beside her. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm not, she said sharply. I'm furious. They've humiliated you while living in your house. Insulted you every chance they got. Tried to make you feel worthless. She took my hand tightly. Why did you ever put up with it? Because I love you. Because they're your parents. Because I foolishly hoped one day they'd see me as more than the man who wasn't good enough to marry their daughter. You're the man who saved them, she said. And they couldn't even say thank you. A knock at the door broke the moment. Diane's voice was smaller now. Can we talk about the lease? I opened the door. Both of them stood there, shrunken. The balance of power shifted so dramatically it was almost surreal. The office downstairs has a printer, I told them. We'll draw up a standard California lease. No unusual terms, just one. Respect. You'll treat me with the same courtesy you'd offer any landlord. You'll treat Melissa as an adult, not as a child you can control. You'll recognize us as the rightful owners of this home. And if we say no, Diane asked quietly, then you'll need to find somewhere else by Monday, I said, echoing her own words back. Your choice. Stay as respectful tenants or leave as resentful ex-homeowners. Either way, the house belongs to us. Frank coughed, trying to recover. The things we said, we didn't mean them. You meant every word, I interrupted. You just didn't realize who you were saying them to. That's not an apology. It's just regret for being caught. What do you want from us? Diane finally asked. Nothing, I replied truthfully. I wanted family. I wanted acceptance. I wanted simple human kindness. 5 years proved I'd never get that. So now, I just want rent paid on time each month. That afternoon, they signed the lease. Diane filled out the check for the first month's rent, every digit in her flawless handwriting spelling out surrender. By the next week, they'd moved into the downstairs guest suite, leaving us the room we needed for a growing family. The shift was instant. No more cutting remarks about my job. No more digs about Melissa settling. No more hints that I wasn't man enough to provide. Funny how quickly respect shows up once someone controls your roof over their head. But the sweetest moment came a month later at a family barbecue. Diane's sister casually asked about their retirement plans. We've decided to stay here, Diane said carefully. Arizona turned out to be too hot. But I thought you were selling the house, her sister pressed. Diane's eyes flicked toward me. I smiled politely, saying nothing. Plans change, her sister echoed. Kevin and Melissa have been generous enough to let us stay, Diane admitted. Let you stay, her sister frowned. But it's your house, isn't it? The silence stretched until Frank finally spoke. Actually, it's theirs. It has been for years. From there, the truth spilled out. how I'd saved them from foreclosure, how they'd spent years in denial and contempt, and how the son-in-law they belittled was the one keeping a roof over them. My God, Diane, her sister gasped. He saved your home, and you've been calling him worthless? Diane had no reply. What could she possibly say? Now, a year later, they're the perfect tenants. Rent on time, polite conversation, even babysitting their grandson, our son, in our house, under our rules. The power games died the day the power shifted. Sometimes I wonder if I should have told Melissa sooner. But timing matters. Back then, she would have been torn between loyalty to them and loyalty to me. Now, as a mother herself, she knows the difference between family and people who just share your blood. These days the house is calm. No more ambushes at breakfast. No more threats of eviction from people who didn't even own the place. Just a clear understanding. Who owns what, who owes whom, and who kept this home standing. They once told us to find our own place. Turns out we already had. We'd been living in it all along, letting them believe it was theirs. The only thing left to uncover was the truth. And Monday? Monday passed quietly. The realtor was canceled. The Arizona retirement dream dissolved. And Diane and Frank learned what it means to live in someone else's home, even when that someone else is the son-in-law they dismissed for 5 long years. Karma doesn't always show up quickly. Sometimes it waits, gathering interest for the perfect moment. And when it arrives, it reminds people that the ones they trample might be the very ones holding them up. The lease is month to month. They know it. I know it. The balance of power couldn't be clearer. And in the house I saved, with the family I chose, we finally found peace.